We are on number 447 of this wonderful book, class number 124. To Devi Mukherjee, the master once said, "Someday lion-like swamis will come from India and aid in spreading this message all over." Master was in America when he said that, so he was talking about swamis coming from India. You know, this has been a hugely motivating factor in especially the monastic life, those who are responsible for the monastic life in India, because they sort of feel like, where are they going to come from if we don't begin to develop the monastic tradition and the power of Master's teachings? So it's just an interesting statement. When would that happen? Who would those swamis be? How would they be trained? What would be their inspiration? But the idea of lion-like swamis, I mean, you have so many different pictures of that. You have a picture of this, this tremendous power of saints. And it's not as if there's no powerful people in India, but as Swami himself said, it's not like it was when he went there the first time. It's like, and one of the reasons that Swamiji created the Naya Swami order was he felt that there was a necessity to renew the whole Indian monastic tradition, because it was so ancient from Adi Shankaracharya's time, and the rules and the regulations and the customs that were set up were for such a different age that much of what he set up was honored in the breach. I mean, people just didn't do it. You didn't handle money, you didn't stay more than 3 days in one place, just lots and lots of restrictions. And that don't apply to the life that we live now. So Swami wrote Sadhu Beware, which is a book of renunciation for now, and then he wrote a renunciate order for the new age, and then he started the Naya Swami order, which simply means new compared to Adi Shankaracharya, which is hundreds of years ago, and then changed the color from orange to blue, because the orange represents the fire, which is the burning up of attachments and of the ego. The blue represents the Christ consciousness to which we all aspire. So Swamiji thought it was more appropriate for Dwapara Yuga to us to focus on what the goal is rather than to focus on what we're leaving behind, because it's a different age. This gives us more sense of the flow of energy that we're working with. Also, sometimes you can't really, it's easier to erase to a certain extent and start over than to try to reform something that has so much tradition behind it. Now, whether or not what Swamiji did will, in fact, in time, become the definition of being a sadhu, being a sannyasi, we have the fond hope that it will be, based on Master's responsibility and Swamiji's role in carrying out that responsibility. You know, the creation of this order, which the inspiration for it came at the end of June, well, Swamiji expressed the inspiration in June of 2009, and then held the first initiation in November. But he was in a period, during that period of time, because I happened to be with him for at least some of it. Let's see, it went from his birthday. On his birthday or just after his birthday, he had some kind of an incident, a very serious incident in which his life was really on the line for some period of time, for a week or about 3 weeks in that period of time. And there was a group of us with him, and when we were in India together, and then we went to Lugano, and then we came to Assisi. By the time we got to Assisi, his health was so precarious that no one felt comfortable letting him stay alone in his house, which is what he customarily did at that period of time. That was just before Narayani became his constant companion. And so she was there, but she wasn't living in his house. And at the end of that, let me just try to get this whole thing. So we never left him alone. People were taking turns Anand mostly spent the night in the house with him, and others of us with him stayed during the day. And I was there in the afternoon, and Swamiji had taken a nap in his bedroom, and somebody was coming to tea about 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, and he had asked me to wake him up. So I went into his bedroom to get him up to greet so he'd be ready when the guests came. And let me just think for a second. Yes, guests did come. And he was so weak and so elderly in his way of being. Maybe he was wearing pajamas, but in any case, he needed to change his shirt. So I went into his closet, and he had these beautiful shirts, and I pulled out a beautiful shirt about this color, silk shirt, which was one of his favorites. And I'm just making conversation with this elderly man while I change his pajama top, because he doesn't have the capacity to do his own buttons. I mean, he was that debilitated. He was whatever, late 80s or early 80s, and I'm just chattering, just being, peppy. I said, Swamiji, because Swamiji only ever wore sannyasi orange. He would wear it when he was in India, but he would only wear it for formal occasions. His regular clothes were a multitude of colors, primarily blue. The only thing he had that was orange was his formal robes, and he only wore them for formal occasions. It wasn't like what we do now, where we're always dressed in this. So I'm putting on this beautiful shirt of cobalt blue, and I said, Swamiji, if the sannyasi color was just blue, then you would wear it all the time. and I was just making conversation. He looked very serious. He said, I'm thinking of changing the color to blue. I said, oh, It's like he hadn't hinted anything about this. He'd written the Sadhu Beware book already, but that was in a slightly different context. And then I helped him come into the living room. He was up, but he stretched out on the couch and put his feet up. The couch was a little short. He put his feet up on the rim and then lay back, and he lay back like that, and he shut his eyes. I took the opportunity to go into the bedroom to make the bed and to tidy things up a little bit, put things away. I come back out. He stretched out on the bed, on the couch like this, absolutely motionless. And I'm thinking, oh no, he's died. He's died while I'm here. Like on my watch, he's left the body. It was a moment, because there was something in the room that was not normal. And he was motionless. And then to my great relief, he sat up and began to speak. And he said, I want to start a new sannyasi order. And then he said, this is what Satan has been trying to stop. Because very often, when he was about to do something new, there would be this very dark force that would very often work through his body. And in some way or another, just try to stop him by making his body so unwell that he couldn't function. I mean, there were times when he would have a big public lecture, for example, and he could barely stand just minutes before the lecture. He just had all the vitality was gone from his body. And then he would walk out and deliver a 2-hour lecture without a hint of weakness. So it was also very unusual for this weakness to continue. Usually it would happen when he would change from one country to the next. But by the time that the shift was made, then everything would equalize. So his nurse was very concerned, because we'd come to Europe and it still hadn't worked out, which was not the usual pattern. Usually the transitions were when there would be difficulty. So he said this was what Satan was trying to stop. Then we start talking about changing it to the color blue and the need for and then within 5 minutes we're talking about what we're going to wear, what color it's going to be, what style it's going to be. And then I told him that I had something that I thought might be suitable, And this is, you may not appreciate this, Swami never let me drive his car, ever. He gives me the keys to his car and lets me drive his car. I was staying about a quarter mile away, which I normally walked, but he wanted me to drive. So he gives me the keys to his car so I can drive up and get something and show it to him that maybe this could be our outfit. By the time I get back, he's sitting at the computer and he started writing the book. I mean, I was buttoning his shirt and then he's writing the book. Like that. And then he calls all these people to come over, which makes me think that it wasn't somebody coming over, but for some reason he wanted me to wake him up. He calls Shivani and Arjuna and just sort of all the leaders of Assisi, and so they all come over that evening, and he tells them he's starting a new renunciate order. I mean, he's just full of vitality, full of life. It was really one of the more remarkable things I've ever seen, and I've seen some pretty unusual things. And then he just plowed forward and wrote the book, and he then later he said that he'd had an experience while he was lying on the couch. In the minutes that I was, I mean, I don't even think it was minutes, but whatever time it was that I was out of the room, he felt, I think he said it was Divine Mother, basically, and he just said, I don't care whether I live or die, it's up to you. But she gave him his life back so that he could do this. He never elucidated it beyond that, but he said he had a healing experience, and it was so that he could finish and do this. And it wasn't because he cared. He was just willing to go at any point. So that's why there was that presence in the room, and that's why he seemed to be out of his body, because he was. But then he was sent back. And then after that, he just referred to it as a healing. He just had a healing from Divine Mother, and he got better and better and better for a period of time there. So that, now, because the conversation just before this one is all about not being a cult and not thinking that ours is the only way. But it is interesting. And we'll see. Swami made the statement that in time, the reason he wanted us all to, when he created the Naya Swami order and held the first initiation in November of 2009, he held it in Assisi, and about 10 of us, 12 of us, maybe a few more than that, came from outside of Italy for that. Either Americans living in India or Americans living in America. We were in this big van together. There was about a dozen of us, plus the people who lived in Assisi. And after the initiation, the next morning, he had all of us newly initiated Nayaswamis in his house for a couple of hours, just talking about what we were going to do. Like now that we've started this new order, how are we supposed to express it? Because prior to that, we lived and looked just like everybody else, almost deliberately. The women colored their hair, cut their hair nicely, wore makeup, wore jewelry. The men dressed nicely. A lot of us had this color consultant tell us what we looked the most attractive in, what colors we should wear when we lecture. I mean, we took the whole thing seriously. So all of a sudden, we've taken a vow of sannyas, which was not something that we thought we were going to do. There's a couple of other things that Swami said that was interesting when that first afternoon, I'm trying to conjure all this because I haven't thought about this in a while, and it was now 10 years ago. I wrote it, it's all written up in various places, but he said, he said he's been trying to think of creating this a new sannyas order for many, many years. He said, but the sticking point was always that many of the most dedicated people at Ananda are married couples. And he just couldn't figure out how he could try to create a core group of renunciates that didn't include the most dedicated people at Ananda. And he was also concerned about, on one of the many issues that he was concerned about with the traditional Swami order, is that there was a sense of superiority there was an inclination towards superiority. The monks felt somewhat superior to the householders. That the monks were really serious and the householders weren't. So householders felt like second-class citizens, and monks could develop a monastic ego. And he didn't think either of those things were very good, Plus, it was very difficult for him to visualize with Ananda as the starting point, although he was very, very clear that even though this order has originated within Ananda, and the vast majority, almost all the initiates are within Ananda, this has nothing to do with Ananda. We have two different orders within Ananda, all of which mention Ananda in the vow, mention our loyalty to our Guru Bhais, to our leaders, to the spiritual directors of Ananda. But nothing in the Naya Swami order mentions Ananda at all, because it has nothing to do with Ananda. It's just between ourselves and God. A Naya Swami may be part of Ananda, but that's not where it comes from. It's just like the traditional Swami order, which is for those who feel called to do it. But Swamiji had a difficult time thinking how he could start this without including what was really the heart and soul of Ananda and the biggest example of dedication. How could he pull out these others and make them Swamis and then leave these people over here? He could never see it. But that day, I guess Divine Mother just said to him, well, just let them stay married. Just allow married couples to become sannyasis. So that night when we had the gathering, he was just talking about this new order, and he was asking us what we thought. And Shivani, who's been married to Arjuna for 40 years at least, in this very small voice, she said, well, husbands and wives have to separate to be part of this order. This little very small voice, and she was ready, if that's what he was asking. And he said, I don't see why that would be necessary. That was how he put it. And so that was the first time he really just said it clearly, that this was going to be a new and a different reality. And that, of course, opened the door for a lot of people who there was no. He said something like, he made a comment about how most of the married couples at Ananda were spiritually helpful to each other. So why would that be necessary? It wasn't. He was really talking about the reality of it. He wasn't talking about it just in principle. So the next morning we sat with Swamiji to find out what we were supposed to do. We'd already taken the initiation, but we weren't really sure what we were supposed to do. I had brought over by that point a prototype of a possible outfit based on conversations that we'd had. He'd been back at the village for the summer. I'd been working on it for months. So I had these two outfits. We made a slight mistake, is that we used as the model two of the men who were just born for clothes, broad shoulders, narrow hips, and, because I'd made it for Swamiji, and it was his size, and there were some men there who were his size. We didn't put it on more challenging body types. So of course it looked great. You could have put anything on these people and they would have looked great. That's what I only realized later. But anyway, we spent a long time. Swami was very specific. He wanted it to be as plain as possible. He since has backed away from, he later backed away a little bit from that, but when he started it, no collar, no buttons, no tailoring, just nothing, just absolutely plain. But of course, it doesn't look very interesting, and it's not very flattering, and so it began to be modified after a little while. But then people just asked him questions. Should women still wear jewelry? Should women still wear makeup? And my hair has never turned white, but a lot of the women, their hair has changed color, and they were aiding nature by dyeing it a little bit. Should women still dye their hair? The men would ask questions more like, do I have to wear that outfit all the time? Because it was strange looking. And someone said, we've spent a lot of time, sir, trying to blend in, trying to help people to feel that they can be part of this path without having to become strange. And in 1979, now we're going back a long way, Swami himself changed from wearing his sadhu, his Indian-style orange dhoti and kurta and chadar, the things that made him look Indian, and put on a sports jacket and a tie, and he'd had long hair, and he cut his hair into a normal Western haircut. And he did and even shaved his beard for a while, but that was only sort of semi-unrelated. Because he said, if you're trying to convert the heathen, it helps if you look like the heathen. That's what he said. That was how he joked about it. For a period of time, he even actually, he suggested we stop using our Sanskrit names. But that was just so unpopular with all of us that didn't last very long. But he was just, he wanted us really to, because he felt that people felt in order to become devoted to God, you had to become outside your own normal sphere of existence, and he wanted people to understand you spiritualize where you're standing rather than having to become unusual. He said he felt like when he appeared like that, people asked all kinds of questions about India and about being a Swami, which was not his message. His message was awaken to the divine within you. So we've all been working on that for a very, very long time. When I moved here in 1987, after living in the rural community for so long, I mean, especially during those years, but we were utterly impoverished, and we lived out in, the mud country. It's like you just, in the winter you wear these big bean boots and these heavy jackets, and I mean, this is just a humorous aside, but in 1979, when Swamiji started the San Francisco house, I think was it on Sunday that I was talking about how I volunteered for that project? Anyway, so I went down there, and we all felt like we needed to get a city wardrobe, but of course we had no money. So we went to the local thrift store, and we were amazed by the fabulous things we could buy there. So we bought all these $2 outfits because that was like our budget. The only person, Keshava Taylor, who lives in India now, his magnetism was incredible. He had exactly the same amount of money as us, but he would find the one designer jacket among 500. He always looked impeccable and up to date. So anyway, we find these fabulous clothes, and we go down to San Francisco. And Jacqueline Snitkin, she's Jamuna now. She lived in San Francisco. She was sort of part of our group there. And she just finally, after we'd been there a few weeks, she had to just find a delicate way to say this. Well, see, here's what had happened. Most of us had moved to Ananda to the village like 10 or 15 years earlier. So the last time we'd paid attention to style or fashion was about 10 or 15 years before. So naturally, we went to the thrift store and we found the last thing that we had worn, and we thought it was just like amazing that you could still buy what we thought looked terrific. Because especially for women, sometimes your consciousness of what's attractive freezes at sort of the last time you paid attention, or the last time you thought you were attractive, whatever it is, and that's why you see sometimes women wearing very odd haircuts or very odd styles, because that was the last time they felt good, so they stick with it. So Jacqueline tried to explain how, it wasn't like immediately obvious what was wrong with us, but that there was just something slightly weird about the way we looked. And so, I caught on to it, and she tried to help us a little bit. I have to just keep, because I'm chattering about this, 10 years later, 15 years later, Jacqueline and her husband, Vasudeva then, were running East West Bookshop, which was in Menlo Park. Actually, it wasn't that. It was about 10 years later, but it was there. They're running East West Bookshop. They're living here in Palo Alto. And this young woman who lived with us then, who doesn't live with us now, beautiful young woman, and very, not in a bad way, but just attractive and stylish, exceedingly. She was very aware of, she put energy into being a very attractive woman. Jacqueline was concerned because she thought she just didn't look right. She didn't look good. She looked just tacky and strange. So Jacqueline comes to me and says, I feel like I need to talk to her because there she is. She's representing us in the store and she's not dressed appropriately. I said, Jacqueline, the chances of that woman not being dressed appropriately are pretty close to zero. I said, I think you should do a little research. I said, I suspect she's the height of fashion. So Jacqueline did a little research and came back and said, you're right. And so she saved herself the terrible embarrassment of ever saying anything to her. So anyway, but there we were. But so when I came here, I realized that I had to, I was about 40, I guess. I realized in this area, people, the way you looked mattered. People needed to feel that you knew what you were doing. So that was when we found this color consultant, and she basically taught me how to be a girl. And I just took her dogmas, and I've never been a natural girl. She just, what colors, what styles, what this, I just followed it and I looked pretty good for 20 years or so. So all of that was real serious, though. That was not like, that was part of what we were doing. Swamiji was always impeccably dressed and always dressed better than most people around him. He felt it was part of the dignity of being Master's disciple. So now we're sitting in Swami's house, and he's telling us we're going to have to wear this, this blue robe thing. Especially for the men, it was just like, wow, this really what we're going to have to do? But here's what was, all of this is to say, no matter what we asked him, the men asked, can I just wear this in the temple? Can I just wear this in the ashram? Do I have to wear it when I go down the street? And Swami said, well, you're right. When the person said, we've spent all this time trying to blend in, Swami said, well, I think now it's time for us to stand out. And he said, now is the time. He said, it's going to take time. I seem to remember him saying something like 20, 30, 40 years. This will become the blue Naya Swami costume will become known as a symbol of dedication to God. But at first it won't be. It'll just be odd. People will ask us about it. Well, that would be a good thing. But at the end of absolutely everything, no matter what the question, he would either give an opinion, and even if he gave an opinion, it would be mild. It would just be, here's my reasoning. And then he would say, do as you feel. Do as you feel. Do as you feel. Because he really wanted us to understand this is not an institution. I'm not setting up an institution that's going to tell you what you're going to do. This is a Dwapara Yuga renunciate order, and each one of you, it's your relationship with God. Should I dye my hair? Should I wear jewelry? And so you see, I myself, because I never dyed my hair because I never needed to, and because I wouldn't anyway, because I'm too lazy and too cheap, probably both. But I had a big wardrobe, and I really liked it. More than many of the women, I really liked clothes, and I really liked to shop. It was just living here all these years. It's like my retail therapy. It was just my entertainment. So I had to become very strict because I knew there was no middle ground for me. I sort of said, look, if I don't just draw the line, I'll be shopping for cute blue clothes for the rest of my life. And I can't do that. So just even as I sat there, I pulled my earrings out. And it took me a while. Let me phrase it differently. I was surprised that it took about 3 days, but it took me about 3 days to realize to give up color and to give up fashion and to give up, not that I was ever stylish, but I had my own way. And I gathered everything I had and I put it in the guest room of Chela Bhavan, our house, and I sent a message out to the whole community. The door was unlocked. And, in about 24 hours, it was pretty much all gone. Just everything. But by then it was like, Om Swaha. But, this was all, it's like, it was, I'm telling you a lot about this, but this is like where the lion-like Swami is going to come from. Will they come from the Naya Swami order? It doesn't matter. They don't have to. It has nothing to do, it's not sectarian what I'm trying to say. Swami's trying to open up another way of being a Naya Swami. And the renunciate order for the New Age describes it. And the Sadhu Beware both describe it. And in Sadhu Beware, which is just an absolutely great book, because the book is actually, it's about overcoming the ego. It doesn't have anything to do with what color you wear or what vows you've taken. It's how to seriously overcome the ego. And whereas in the past, the way people overcame the ego was to suppress it. You go into monastic, especially in a monastic life, you suppress it. You go into a monastic order, you have no will, you have no opinions of your own, you just become obedient to whatever the system is. You know exactly where you stand in the hierarchy. You have this role, you live this role, and you're secure in that. When I was a brahmacharini, I've been in and out of this. This was my second round. My first 10 years at Ananda, I was also in the monastery, the original version of this, long before the sannyas order. And that we were so free-flowing and ruleless. We were so free-flowing. And I remember thinking, and this is like karmic memories for me, if I was in a traditional Catholic, which is the only kind of monastery I could think of, I never thought in terms of Buddhism. If I were in a traditional Catholic order, I would be able to stand here and know exactly what I would be doing at exactly what time of day 50 years in the future. Because you just get into that routine, and that's what you do. I mean, not all of the orders, some are more even then, but still, there was this absolute predictability to it. And I remember walking over the hill from where we lived to where I was working, within Ananda village, thinking to myself, on one hand, how wonderful that would be. Just the sense of complete release of any necessity to plan your own life. All you had to do, all you would have to do, was just have the right attitude in the middle of it. All details are taken away from you. And there was so much, on one hand, so much attractiveness to that. And on the other hand, there was the realization that I would never be able to do it. That I just had too many different agendas going on. Or I didn't believe I would be able to do it. So in Sadhu Beware, Swami talks a lot about self-expression, artistic self-expression, self-sufficiency. He even talks about money. How does a renunciate relate to money? And he talks about how it often somewhat inhibits a certain kind of dynamic magnetism if a person never has to deal with money and is just taken care of without ever having to be responsible and have to manifest and manage, that form of energy. It depends on where you are and in the cycle of your own learning and so on like that. But he deals with all those different kinds of things. So there, when we're Naya Swamis, that's how he's also talking to us about it. It's like you have to do as you feel. You have to, from the point of view of the costume, for example, many people have taken a much more flexible attitude toward it than I have. But I had to do as I felt because I know myself. And I knew that for me it had to be all or nothing. Others, their relationship to what they wear is casual, and they don't use any energy on it. So it doesn't matter to them one way or another. But we were talking concrete, relatively superficial things, but it's interesting to me that within 10 minutes of Swami, being miraculously healed, telling me that Satan was trying to stop him, and he's going to start a new order. We are talking about what we're going to wear. It was really very interesting how that happened, because somehow the habit, which is what you would call it, becomes symbolic of the life. And he always thought, and then, because I'm the costumer by profession, I guess. I think I was at one point Swamiji, because he would work at home and write, and sometimes he would just get up early and meditate and then start writing, and sometimes he wouldn't really get out of his pajamas until people come over for tea at 4 p.m. So he spent a lot of time in his bathrobe. So his bathrobe was important to him. So he liked to have attractive silk bathrobes, and he would buy them whenever he would see them. And once he was here, when he was visiting here in Palo Alto, and he would always go over to the Stanford Shopping Center, and he would look at Nordstrom's usually, and he would look around for silk bathrobes, and he didn't find anything that was very attractive. I said, "Sir, I can make them for you." I said, "There's this beautiful silk store over here,
and we can just go by and buy beautiful fabrics, and I'll make you silk bathrobes, which I got in way over my head on that one. But anyway, I did. I made him a number of them, most of which gradually faded out from his wardrobe. By the end of his life, the only one he still had was a bright red silk jacquard that he still had. But one of the ones I made was like two-sided, like dark purple on one side and lavender on the other. And it was fantastic. And I was sort of crawling around fitting it on him. And it looked Mandarin. It looked Chinese for some reason because of the nature of the silk. And it was a real flashback to some other lifetime. All of a sudden, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been dressing the king. So that was the most impressive, because I really thought we were in China, and he was some. Not that Swami has much relationship to China, or that I do either, but in that moment, I don't know where we were. We could have been India, but where we. So when we had to make this robe, and because I was there starting, and because I had made his clothes earlier. I used to make his Swami, his orange Swami clothes, until he started going back to India, and then until Bella Padapavskaya showed up, because she was an actual professional dressmaker and designer, and I'm a talented hone seamstress, and I'm not even really a very talented one, and she was a dressmaker, so she just put me in the shade immediately. So there we are, and he wants this robe, and I was pretty sure if I didn't do it, it wouldn't get done, and it felt important to me. So the first round of it was, he wanted the color to be indigo. There we have it, indigo. So I spent a lot of time and quite a lot of money making this indigo outfit for him that I had to have specially dyed, and it was hundreds of dollars, plus the false starts on it. And I'm actually driving up to Ananda village to show it to him. And at that time he wanted us to have a cowl. Fortunately, on that morning after the initiation, because we had a cowl on this thing, and none of us wanted a cowl. The last thing we wanted was a cowl. And we're just sitting there, and it's like time is ticking, and we've still got the cowl, And finally, someone says, the cowl is from the past. We want to look to the future. So I said, yes, that's exactly right. And we all behind the chair, we got, yes. And afterwards, with that guy, it was like, thank you, our Savior. So we took off the cowl. Whew. But in any case, so it was just all this stuff going on. So I'm on my way to Ananda village with this specially dyed silk thing with this cowl and everything. And I meet somebody in Nevada City, and she tells me that morning Swami had been on the telephone with people in India, and they said, you can't use indigo for a sadhu color. It's the color of Shudras, which is the lowest caste. And my first response was, well, Shudras can't own the color of the spiritual eye. What are we talking about? But by the time I get there with this thing that I've been working on, it's like color's gone, and it can't be that color anymore. Yeah. So Jyotish and Devi brought to Swami's house every blue thing they had, and he chose a blue, which was not, well, this is not perfect. I don't have anything that's perfect. This is closer. It's sort of hard to see, but anyway, these are variations, because we're a little variation on it now, but they brought over, and we picked this color that was sort of periwinkle. I go all the way back and start all the way over, doing the whole thing again. I finally, and there was this dye company in San Jose, this old guy who still did dyeing, and he's gone now. You can't get that done anymore. So I bring, and he'd done other work for me because he'd done Swami's orange. I had him dye all Swami's orange clothes too. And so and he was perfect. He could match anything, absolutely perfectly. So I bring him the color that we're going to use, like this, and he's going to dye it, and he returns it to me, and it is a totally different shade of blue. Totally different. And he's never in all my experience with him did he ever miss. He totally missed, and it was the Naya Swami blue. And the other color was periwinkle. It wasn't the right color. And it was just created out of like, just this. And I looked at both of them, and I don't know what happened. I said, this is fine. This is perfect. Because it was perfect. And I sent it up to Swami. He was in Sacramento giving a program. There's a picture of him in a blue outfit. And we still had the cowl at that point. He has the cowl on the back. And he's pronaming like that. It's in my light bearer book. It was the first time he wore the blue outfit. And for some weird reason, I put about 1 million snaps on it. Do not ask me why. I was determined not to have a zipper, these weird ideas. So this thing kind of opened up this way and had all these snaps. The next morning, Swami came from Sacramento to Palo Alto, and he said, there's a problem with that outfit. He said, every Naya Swami is going to have a brahmachari help him dress. It was just like, what was I thinking? So I pulled all the snaps off and put a zipper. But so after all this, and then there were even more iterations. By the time it's all done, and we finally have this, it's all settled. Then, like, would it have been? It was January. We were close to being settled, because by the time of November, we were pretty settled. It's January. I'm with Swami and Dharmadas and Nirmala. We're in India. We're sitting at the Goa, the Taj Exotica resort where we often went in January with Swamiji. We're sitting there having tea, watching the sunset. Just David, me, Dharmadas, and Nirmala. And Swami, a very small trip that year. And Swami looks at the sunset and he said, when I was in Italy, it seemed really important to me that we have a Naya Swami outfit. He said, now that I'm in India, it doesn't seem important at all. And I breathed in and breathed out. By now I'm like and I don't know how, but I think I'm about $2,000 into this, and like so many hours of work, just doing, so many things happened, getting patterns made, getting fabric dyed, like 500, I think it was even $1,000 worth of silk that wouldn't take the dye, that was just a total ruinous mess, things like that. It was, and all of a sudden he says, oh, who cares? I said, why don't we just set the pattern, and then we'll have a starting point, and then we can just riff off of that. If we have no starting point, if we have no color and style as a starting point, I said, it'll never. And he said, okay, like that. And then I made the others, I swore them to secrecy. Here I'm blowing my cover, but now it's 10 years later. I said, you just can't, not after all this. But I actually also felt, in fact, that we did need it. We needed a place to start. I think we needed a reference point. Otherwise, there was no telling, because I think it does matter. And he didn't disagree. He was just talking about, in India, who cares? In Italy, where everything is the church and so on like that, it was very different. And I think in the West, we do need something. But people have moved from all of that. Wow, all of that about the Naya Swami order. That was all really. So we did. And then people have been creative from it. But because we did start somewhere, and because he did, the specific pattern was not that important, but he wanted a gender-neutral outfit that both genders could wear. At one point he suggested a slight distinction, but mostly he wanted it to be gender-neutral and somewhat Indian, tunic and pants, and not fancy. I remember one woman showed up once in something, and he said, it's very pretty, it's not very Nayaswami, he said like that. Because it was also individual. To others he wouldn't comment. So, all right, let's take a short break, since that was a long story about lion-like swamis. Because I was just telling fun stories, which ended up being mostly about the color blue and what we wear, I really wanted to put it on a different level before I abandoned the subject. It happened to be my responsibility and my adventure. So, that was I was just giving you a backstory. And whether it was really important to Swami or not, in the end, I took it up. I've just taken up the cause of what we wear, the light bearers, what the light bearers wear, and so on. It's just been part of my dharma. But the opportunity that Swami opened to us to become sadhus has not been an insignificant gift. And in fact, at just the time that this was happening, so this was 2009, and I was born in 1947, so I had just passed over being 60. And my life has sort of been in, I came to Ananda in my early 20s. I came into this urban center just before I was 40. Then, I'm moving into 60. I mean, you can see these segments. And having to be a female person and represent like that, as I said, that was never natural to me. It was, some girls have a natural sense of style and a natural interest in all of that sort of thing, and I just never did, even to this day. I mean, now I have my hair exceedingly short, but I didn't wear it this short most of my life. But even still, I would say to the hairdresser, you just have to cut it really well because I'm not going to do anything to it. She said to me, you can't just, wash your hair and just walk out. I said, come over and watch me. I will show you how it's done, because that's what I will do, because I can deal with my 15 seconds before I become just hysterical to stop. I'm sure again, these are all like samskars. I must have had to just sit there and be dressed and made up and I don't know what, in many, many different lifetimes, and I really can't stand it. And I've never had an instinct for that sort of thing. But I really did realize that in order to be a woman teaching these teachings, especially in an area like Palo Alto, I had to be able to stand with anyone and not look a little weird, just like we did in San Francisco at that time, because if you look odd, people won't take you seriously. And I didn't have master's power. I couldn't magnetize people. I had to win them on every level. And color actually was a big part of that, which we learned from our color consultant, who was kind of like a color healer. But what I was going to say is that, like, the two segments of my life that I'd already been through, 20 to 60, somehow they were in 20-year periods virtually. And they were all really dynamic. And I was now realizing I'm in my 60s. A woman changes a lot. I have to now, and I'd started looking at older women and trying to decide why some of them looked, and I don't mean beautiful, why some of them were so magnetic and some of them looked so exhausted. And I was actually really trying to think, what do I need to do now? Because I'd always been conscious of this fact of the sense of style in women freezing at a certain point, and then you're 80 and you're still dressing like you did in junior high because that was the last time you really thought you were pretty, or whatever the dynamic of that is. So I'd been thinking about that, and on a much more subtle level, I'd been thinking about, my life has been very, very dynamic, and I really want to keep it dynamic. But I know it can't continue in exactly the same way, because already many things were shifting. How am I going to make this last segment of my quarter of my life, is how I thought about it, as dynamic as the others? And I was worried about it, because I just didn't know how it was going to play out. A lot of what I had done was done, and it was a dilemma. I'd already written the first book about Swami. I didn't know about what was coming. Ananda Palo Alto was very well established. We were already, I was already surrendering responsibilities. It was just very much of a question. And I saw how many people at the end of their life lose energy. They lose magnetism, they lose creativity, they lose energy. My physical body, fortunately, even to this day, it still allows me pretty much to do anything I want to do, which is just a gift from God. And I didn't know if I could depend on that. So when Swami asked me, what do you think of the Naya Swami order? What do you think about it? I said, I feel that I have been rescued from the possibility of spiritual mediocrity. And Swami, there was no smile or anything. He said, yes, just like that. And I thought, yeah, that's right. Because it really gave me, and many of us, but I'm just speaking for myself, wow, there is a big next step. Because I know what a sannyasi is. I've always known what a sannyasi is. And I started my life thinking I would end up as a sannyasi, but I took a long life through marriage instead. And suddenly, to have that sannyasi possibility back, to me at least, it didn't mean business as usual. It was really giving me a completely different self-definition and a challenge, an Olympic-sized challenge, that I wasn't just going to have a comfortable retirement. Because Ananda has not provided for us. And this is a very real thing. When we were young, we all thought Ananda was going to provide for us. Or let me phrase it differently. We somehow thought that Ananda was going to become really prosperous eventually. Because, nowadays, I have these people, I have had people, like somebody 28 talking to me about their IRA. Like, somebody's coming and telling me about how miserable their life is and how they don't have any meaning. I say, well, why don't you, travel? Why don't you go up to Ananda village for a while? Why don't you just do something? And this only happened to me once, this explicitly. But he actually spoke about his retirement plan. I said, you haven't had a life. You're 28 years old. It's like maybe you should have a life before you have a retirement. But it was just like that's how people were set up. And in the early years of Ananda, we had nothing, and we had no prospects of having anything. Now, I was on the renunciate path already, and I had this tiny trailer, and now I had a family behind me. I have to say that, not a wealthy family, but I knew I would never be on the street. I don't know if my security came from that, or just that I really believed in God. How can you say? But I had this little trailer. I had almost nothing. I had a harmonium. I had a mala. And I had this, soon I had this meditation blanket that Swami gave me. I had my, we all wore LL Bean boots at that time. I had my bean boots. That was your bean boots were really important to you. And I had a warm jacket. And I looked forward to having less. I thought of my life as that someday I'll have less. And I loved that thought. But the thought was still there. What's going to happen to us, when we get older? And every so often we'd have a conversation. There was nothing we could say because there was nothing we could do. But in fact, Ananda has not provided for us because it just hasn't turned out to be as prosperous enough to provide for us. So even those of us who have given our lives to Ananda, and to use a gentle phrase, we have not maximized our earning potential. We don't really have any security. And then there's an odd thing. Some people have inherited, because those of us who came young, like me, have inherited some money. Some have inherited a lot. Some have inherited little. And some never had a family that could leave them anything. So we're all here without really having a net behind us. So then you get to be a sannyasi officially. And you're not just merely a renunciate at Ananda, but now you've actually become a sannyasi, and with all that means. So it's not been a small thing, to just really, every day, I've really taken a vow of sannyas. What does that really mean? What am I really depending on? In one of those conversations which happened maybe 25 or 30 years into Ananda about how are we going to manage this when we're older, and we really don't have I don't want to overstate or understate it, but it's interesting. We're not exactly where we thought we would be. So it's a little bit of a dicey issue for everybody involved, and everybody gets to ask themselves what's my faith? And a lot of the early members of Ananda are sannyasis, but we're still in a position. What do I have faith in? And one of those conversations, it was actually Nitai, and I want to give him credit for it. But he stood up and he spoke. He said, I gave my life to God, and God sent me to Ananda, and I serve Ananda. He said, but Ananda doesn't owe me. He said, I don't expect Ananda to take care of me. He said, why should it? He said, I've given my life to God. If God puts me under a bridge at the end of my life, then that's where he puts me. I mean, it was a very courageous thing for him to say. And he's lived up to it. He's absolutely lived up to it. I mean, when I was traveling with him in Israel about 4 years ago, he had no place to live, and he had no job really at that point. And he had just been brought on that trip, sort of. And in the middle of the trip, he was offered a place to live and work to do. Not that Nitai didn't have talents and wouldn't be respected, but he was telling me that he'd moved out of where he'd been living, and everything was in this car he had, and the car was parked. And he was on this trip, and then when he went, and it happened when he went back, he had a place to go and a place to live. But he was at peace with it. Whether he was tense about it or not, I don't know. But so these are very real issues. We play at this being devotees. And, we just, I've had many in the last few years, many times to ask, what is it that gives me confidence in my life? I've been well taken care of, but most of the responsibility for my care has actually been in the hands of others for most of my life. So I've had this marvelous freedom, but it's not been the freedom of absolute dependence on God. It's actually been depending on somebody else who was thinking about it, which is really quite different. And I've had to really think about that a lot. And just, I don't know. I don't have any answers for any of these, but these are very real issues. And part of what the sannyas order has been asking of us, that Swami really, that's why he said, saving you from spiritual mediocrity. I was going to be a 72-and-a-half-year-old woman with a lavender scarf and a set of slightly different earrings than I wore when I was younger. Just that's what I was going for, and a little bit of eyeshadow, and so that I could be one of those classy older women. Because I didn't know what else to do. And he said, oh, well, let's do something completely else. So this is whether you don't have to join a monastic order, but it's a very good question to ask. Why do I feel safe? Or why do I not feel safe? And of course, I have no children. I have no responsibilities for anyone. So I don't have to think about things like that. People with children and my parents are gone. It's just I have nothing that I have to worry about. And I did inherit, not enough to never have to think about it, but enough so that I can go to the chiropractor if I need to. But what if I couldn't? Every time now that I do anything like that, I ask myself, there's so little money left, but it's not going to last. What's going to happen then? What's going to happen when your back goes out? What if God doesn't give you a chiropractor? What will you do then? What happens if the coronavirus comes through and we're all just suddenly nowhere? What if what if? What do we really believe in? Good questions, huh? I feel powerfully strengthened by having become a sannyasi, rather than feeling scared by it. It really gave me something. And I use that phrase on myself. I'm a sannyasi. That's what I like to think of myself as. I've taken the vow of sannyas. And I take it very seriously. So it's big. And that's what Swami wants us to exemplify, all of us. Just, we all should become lion-like Swamis. Why not? But it's not so simple. When I was a young brahmacharini, I thought it was so simple. We'll see. Okay? I didn't want to leave it on the level of blue clothes. But getting dressed every day in this and always wearing this, it makes a big difference. When I'm alone, people just say to me, "Oh, what a beautiful color." It's when there's 3 or 4 of you together. But the number of times we've actually been asked has been so few, it's amazing to me. Just amazing how rarely people ask. And I usually say, I'm part of a yoga ashram and I've taken a certain initiation, and part of it is I wear this color. But almost no one has ever asked me another question. I would think I would ask a lot of questions after that, but almost no one has. The children ask me in the school here, "Why do you always wear blue?" I said, "I made a promise to God." They said, "Okay." I wait for another, I'm talking about little ones, because the big ones don't think to ask.
But I was wondering if you could say specifically what is sannyas?
Oh. From now on, I embrace as the only purpose of my life the search for God. It says I will never take a partner, or if I am married, I will consider that my spouse does not belong to me, but belongs to God. And in any case, I am complete within myself, and within myself will merge all the opposites of duality. I no longer exist as a separate entity, but offer myself into the infinite. I've lost that there. Oddly enough, I can't say it all, but I no longer define myself by anything that I do. I will feel that not only the fruit of my labor, but the labor itself comes from the act through me always, that I may always do thy will. I can usually recite this. It's odd that I can't. I am free in thy joy and will rejoice forever in thy blissful presence. Help me that to live this vow, because I have no goal in life except to know God. It's pretty complete. I can usually recite the whole thing, but for some reason my mind is blanking a little bit. There's one more paragraph that's just before, not only the fruit of my labor, but nothing that I do belongs to me. Nothing. Nothing that I do. Nothing is mine. Everything. I no longer exist as a separate entity. We joke about that. I no longer exist as a separate entity, but offer myself into the infinite. Wow. I will feel that not only the fruit of my labor, but the labor itself comes from thee. So you cease to exist. Sannyas is ceasing to exist as a separate entity. That, at least even the effort to do that certainly lifts you from spiritual mediocrity. For me, because of who I am, of what my karmic realities are, it's all about fear. That's just been my karmic test. It's all about fear, not in the fear of, it's not like I don't project disaster. That's not my fear. But there's this underlying tension, is how I would put it, that is based on a lack of complete faith that God is with me and God is in charge. So that vow to me just tells me, what are you holding on to? What are you defining yourself by? What have you got to lose? Who do you think you are? And so it comes down to money, because at the age that I am, money is an issue. It's coming down recently to where will I live? Who will be my friends? I'm alone. I'm alone in the world in a certain sense. I have thousands of people who watch videos that I do. I have an embarrassment of videos on my YouTube channel. I think we're close to 900. It's just insane. And so on one level, there's this whole world that I belong to, but in fact I'm alone, because everyone is alone. And what is the source of my security? That's basically my everyday question. What is the source of my security? And the sannyasi says only God. Ideally, I have no home, I have no relationships, I have no possessions, I have no self-definition, I have no respect from the world for my talents, I have no pride in what I do because I don't even do it. Not only the fruit of my labor, but the labor itself belongs to others, to God. Now, that's a high bar. But you don't take a vow for something that you already have done. I don't get up in the morning and say, I will not murder anyone today. I absolutely won't murder anyone. I won't steal anybody's money, and I won't litter. I don't have to say I won't do those things because I won't do them. It's effortless to not do those things. So you take a vow because it's the right size step. I've never doubted for an instant that it was the right size step, but it's a humdinger. And so everything that waffles me, which is why most of the time I can recite that vow word for word, everything that rattles my brain, I have to say that again. If you no longer exist as a separate entity, but offer myself unreservedly into thy great ocean of awareness, then why am I nervous? If I am free in thy joy and rejoice in thy blissful presence, why am I nervous? Why am I anxious about anything? Why am I trying to control this? Why am I impatient with that? Just the normal course of life. As people go, I move through life pretty comfortably, but compared to God realization, there's a lot of space. So I neither want to exaggerate nor understate. Compared to I no longer exist as a separate entity, and I have no goal in life but to know thee, then there's a lot of space. Does that answer the question enough? Yeah, and it has saved me from spiritual mediocrity. Because I didn't have an articulation for where I was trying to go. I was just, going to hang out here in Palo Alto and try to make everything nice and, try to age graciously. I just didn't know how to focus it. I couldn't figure out how to focus it. But this the clothes, partly being female and just having always to think about how I presented myself just because of the world I lived in, that was and is, it's been a huge way of who am I? What am I even? What am I? Am I even female anymore? Do I have an age? Do I have anything? Do I even have a body? In my house, people laugh. I cover all the mirrors in the room that I live in. You go into a bathroom and you have like a 4x7 mirror that you're looking at. So every single time you walk into the bathroom, you have to know, I have a body, I have an age, I have a gender, I have an appearance. And I figured this out decades ago. If you don't have mirrors, you actually, especially if you don't have a mirror in your bathroom, you forget you have a body. It's amazing how much the fact of walking in front of a mirror constantly reminds you that you are a body. Otherwise, you're just a consciousness moving around. So in the Jewish tradition, when somebody dies, they have something they call shiv, sitting shiv, which is like 7 days of mourning. And for some reason, you cover all your mirrors. So when Shivani, my Jewish friend, she came into my bathroom and I had put contact paper over this huge mirror. She said, "Are you sitting shiv? Did someone die?" I said, "No, Shivani, that's just how I keep it, because then I don't have to remember I have a body." So I have a little tiny one so I can look in and see, if I'm still there, but... But all of that, and not wearing a uniform every day that's always the same, that is not hideous, but is not particularly attractive either. It just is. All of that just takes all those self-definitions gradually away from you. If it's appropriate. Swami, one of the things that Swami said that I remember, this was like from... might have been from the book Yours, the Universe, which he published in like 1970, and was like one of the first books I ever read. And I've always remembered this. This then to me is renunciation, to kick aside all limitation and merge with infinity. And I might not have that exactly right, but this then to me is renunciation, to kick aside all limitation. And I, from 22 years old, I thought, yeah, that's for me. And because of the life we've lived at Ananda, I live in this really nice house, and I have a very nice car, and I live in a very comfortable area, and I get my hair cut by somebody who does it nicely, and just even still. So you don't get to go into a monastery, you don't get to become some wild sadhu in the mountains. You have to actually become a renunciate. And that's really, really different. And I love it. I have that vow right by my bed. I have it right on my altar because it saves me constantly. It does exactly what a vow is supposed to do, which is it shows me who I'm aspiring to be, and it's telling me how to get there. And everything, I measure everything against it. I come up short, but it's my point. I can tell when I'm okay or not. I started to say I'm proud to be a renunciate, but that's not exactly what I mean. I'm thrilled to be a sannyasi. That's what I mean by it. It really moves my heart very deeply. I don't think I've ever talked about it like that. Thank you for asking. When the 12 of us were in the van and we were in Assisi and we had just taken the vow, we decided, every entity, you have a gaggle of geese and a pride of lions and so on. So we decided, what is it when you have a group of Nayaswamis? And Dharmadas said, you have a void. Because I no longer exist as a separate entity. So. Okay.
That's like the birthday card. Could you say which checkbook?
I did 1, number 447.